Welcome Ethan's song. Nice meeting you.
Thank you.
Can't wait to listen to your story.
Sure.
The stage is yours.
I like this stage here. The night I got here, it was really funny because there was no, like on Saturday night, there was no one in the streets because everyone was watching Eurovision. And coming from North America, you don't know about Eurovision, but it's a big deal, right? Here, it's a really big deal. So anyways, this stage makes me think about Eurovision a little bit. Awesome presentation. I'm a big fan of Beta Brand, actually. I saw them grew kind of at the same time that we grew, right? So it was really interesting. And the thing that's interesting about Frank and Oak is that, well, we're based in Canada, right? So a lot of times people think that we're a US company because a lot of people think that, Canada is a state of the United States. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we're our own country. So actually what's interesting is that I tend to give a lot of these speeches at conferences in Canada, and I always tell them, we gotta think more global. Let's stop thinking about the US and Canada, let's think more global. And the example I always give people is that we gotta think more like Swedish companies. Which is interesting because now I'm in Sweden. So hopefully today you guys can learn a little bit about a small company from Canada, right? So just to get started, I'm gonna tell you guys a little bit about the story of Frank and Oak. I started Frank and Oak with one of my best friends, like in a lot of startups, in 2012. And the idea was, how do we go about creating a meaningful brand in today's world? And then how do we go about making this idea of shopping and consuming products more enjoyable, more fun, and easier for men, right? The thing that's interesting about Frank and Oak, and it's actually similar to a Beta Brand in some ways, is the fact that we own the entire experience, right? We own the product that you consume, the content that we create, we own the channels. You will never find a Frank and Oak product outside of a Frank and Oak channel. And what that allows us to do is to really connect the experience with the product that we design, right? Always with the same vision of making shopping easy for men, right? So for those of you that don't know, I should have started with that, but we make basically shirts, suits, jackets, pants, everything basically that the modern man would need. Now, the thing that's interesting is that we actually started another business before that. And the reason why it's important for me to talk about it are the learnings that we got from the previous business. So Isham and I, we started this other company focused on this idea of personalization, right? We wanted to combine technology with retail and fashion and give you the most personalized experience ever. Personalized service, personalized stylist, personalized clothing that fit your body, all the way to everything that you can choose. And the thing that's interesting is that when we launched that previous business, we grew that actually to doing over $1 million in our first year. So I would say we were mildly successful doing it. But we realized that actually, technology can actually create a barrier towards the experience, right? You can actually make the experience of shopping, of consuming products more complicated. So we took a step back from our learning and then started Frank and Oak with the idea of saying, well, everything that we developed, all the technology, all the experiences, let's throw that away and let's make our experience as simple, as easy as possible. And that was the foundation of Frank and Oak. Less products, more relevant products for customers, and the right content to help you get to the products that you like. So that was kind of like the foundation. And since then, I would say, we've grown tremendously. Just here are some numbers about Frank and Oak. We have over 100 employees now between New York and Montreal office. In the last year alone, we sold 700,000 products, over 700,000 products that we designed in our Montreal studios. And that's only in our third year in business. And I think that this says a lot about what you can do in today's world when it comes to creating a brand. Just recently, we got a lot of attention because we were named in Fast Company's top 10 most innovative retail companies in the world, and we're named in one of Canada's most innovative companies this year. Now, I always say you don't want to believe the hype, right? Like hype is like, I know like Beta Brand like focuses a lot on like creating that story, but I like to think about the customer, and I like to not think about what the media says, but what we're actually doing. And the truth is, we're actually in a very disruptive time, right, in the world of retail. And in some ways, both myself and my co-founder, when we started Frank and Oak, we actually weren't aware of that. Like, we were just two guys wanting to start something. We're passionate about like creating a brand, passionate about technology. But you just realize that, wow, like right now, like a lot of stores are closing. It's very, very hard to create a new brand out there. And e-commerce companies that were started in the last 5 years are struggling. Like a lot of companies where hundreds of millions of dollars of money have gone to those companies, they're struggling. 5 years ago, if you would ask like an investor, they would have said, well, you know, if you understand like performance marketing, if you understand data, you can scale your business to infinite. Well, obviously, as we've seen in the market, that's not possible, right? The cost of like digital marketing has increased, and it's very difficult to scale an online business. And the reality is because if you think about it, stores, right, are high cost, high infrastructure. You need big teams. It's very complex business to manage. But the online business actually tends to be just as complicated, right? You don't get the same kind of density. You don't get the personalized, you know, one-on-one experience. And most of all, if you factor in the cost of acquisition, it's actually a very expensive business to be in. So what are we going to do, right? Like this conference is called eCommerce conference. So like, is e-commerce going to be what it's going to be? Like, is it going to really deliver on the value that we think it's going to deliver on? What I would say in the last 3 years, I've really, really changed the way that I look at our business and the way I look at where commerce and where customers are going the next 20 years. And it's a much more complex proposition than what I thought when we first started. And I thought that all we had to do was to put products online, get the attention of our customers, and we would be successful, right? There's 3 things that I've learned in the last few years that I found to be true if you're going to go and create a brand in today's world. The first thing is values are probably the most defensible and the most important thing about your product and your brand. Not the technology, not like even your user base and the number of emails that you have. And for Frank and Oak, we really discovered a new generation of men, in our case, that really connected with the brand. And a big part of Frank and Oak's success actually comes from the fact that we understand Vien here, who's like a typical Frank and Oak customer, who's 27 and does live in San Francisco, as it happens. He's our typical customer, right? He went to school, he's dreamy, he's a graphic designer. He doesn't really expect to hold a job for too long, and understanding that deep cultural aspect of who your customer is a big part of what the internet can actually bring you. From the content that they read to the kind of interaction they want to have with your brand, a lot of value that comes with this idea of e-commerce doesn't come from the transaction, but from the data and the type of content that you can actually get from your customer, right? And one of the things that I think is very relevant to, let's say, even the Swedish market is the fact that one opportunity that I see in today's world is that you have this customer, especially when it comes to the millennial customer, that feels globally connected, right? Someone in Montreal, where a company is based, or someone in San Francisco, is probably reading the same piece of news at the same time as someone here in Stockholm. And I see that as an incredible opportunity when it comes to creating a brand. But what we have to understand is this dual relationship in our customers. We have a customer that's very global in the kind of information that they get, but in the types of values that they value as people, they actually value the local and the community aspect in a very important manner. So what we've done at Frank & Oak is to understand that our customer, they will be shopping for clothes on their mobile while hanging out in their local bar, right? So what kind of experiences, what kind of content, what kind of product are we going to go create to basically connect with that customer? And in some ways, one of the big unique aspects about Frank & Oak is that we've built basically a media company. And this is something that when we first started, we didn't even have that vision. We didn't realize that's what we were doing. In some ways, it's not about what you sell, it's about the values that your company has. And in order to express those values, all companies in today's world have to become media companies, right? You don't depend on a magazine to create your story anymore. You have to own your story. And Frank & Oak actually not only owns stories, but we own multiple platforms. We have a digital platform called Notes. We have our print magazine, which you can see the latest issue on the slide, called Oak Street. We actually own the media and the channels through which we are communicating with our customers. Why? Because the values that we're communicating are almost more important than the product that we're selling, right? So, and here are other things that we're doing. Once we started with the content, the second aspect that we did to communicate the values that Frank and Oak stands for, is to go hyper-local, right? Why? Because content is global, as I mentioned, and then this aspect of our customer wanting authentic experience locally is the hyper-local aspect, and that's where we started our ambassadors program. We started to create events, live events, in small cities where we can only touch maybe 100 people, but we know that the impact of that is much deeper than what we could achieve with, let's say, thousands of people online sometimes, right? So the values of your brand are super important, and they're very defensible. It's one way of not making your e-commerce or experience a commodity, right? The second aspect is the fact that experiences are actually products, right? If you think about, let's say, all the innovation that's happening on the consumer side, let's say Uber as an example, or like even Airbnb, right? You could do that before. It is not a new service. You could find places to rent. You could obviously call a taxi, but the simple innovation on the experience is completely game-changing, right? So, and this is the one I often get challenged on, like even by investors, is the fact that they'll say, well, experiences are easy to replicate, right? Ultimately, it's what you sell that will differentiate you. I completely disagree on that. Because the experience of, let's say, going to an H&M store or going to, like, let's say, Nitty Gritty here, not far from here, is completely different. And they own that experience. And an experience like that, it's actually very hard to copy. So at Frank and Oak, from the beginning, we focused on experience and on making that experience special. Now, one funny fact that we always say at our company is that, so Isham and I, we actually come from, like, more of the content technology world, not of the fashion world. So in the beginning, we said, well, the only reason why we're so good at experience is that we can't make products. So we have to fake, basically, our experience until someone wants to buy our product. And over time, we caught up on the product side as well, luckily. But the truth is, people are craving new experiences, right? When I talk about like making shopping easier for men, just that is a very strong marketing message that will get you a lot of traction, right? Because in the end, the shirt that the customer buys is not that different than any other shirt, right? But the experience is completely different, and the experience is very defensible. So what kind of experience have we focused on? We focused on this idea of being your advisor, right? How can I build my brand, in our case, Frank and Oak, to be not just a product that we distribute, right? Product and channel and distribution, but that through the experience of Frank and Oak, you actually learn something. You actually learn a piece of data about how to dress better, how to feel better, how to live better while you're consuming that product. It's extremely powerful because the next time you will need something, even though someone else has something on sale, you will be like, well, my advisor at Frank and Oak can actually help me, right? And that kind of real relationship is very important. So what we've started doing is actually to pair every single customer that we have with a very specific style advisor that sits within our office, so you have a real one-on-one relationship, right? The reason why we do that is because we realize that, especially when it comes to men, so you have the magazine, right? You have the product. And you're like, okay, the trends of the year is, let's say, bomber jackets. But how do I make that extra move? Well, we realize that, let's say, girlfriends have an important role to play, right, in our customer's life. That extra move is, oh, Tom, you look great in that jacket, right? So what happens when your girlfriend is not there? Well, you have your Frank and Oak style advisor. And your style advisor can say, don't get this jacket, get this jacket because you look good. And as it happens with men, this is a super high conversion like strategy, but it also makes you feel good, right? We become your advisor, not just to make our product. The last point I want to make about something I really learned is that really this idea of e-commerce, it's actually not really about e-commerce. And I'm going to recommend to the conference organizers they find a different name for next year. Because if you think about it, right, e-commerce to all of us probably means this sort of like Amazon type experience. I'm at home, I order something, and I get a box, right, in the mail a couple days after. But the truth is, that's not the e-commerce experience that are going to change the world of tomorrow, right? If you think about it, all of us, if we already don't have 3 computers on us via our mobile phones and iWatches and devices, everything is going to be connected. And I can tell you that every single city will get same-day delivery, will get same-hour delivery. So if you think about it, if you remove the point of order and where the inventory sits, or actually sometimes there is no inventory, that is what e-commerce is, right? So like to me, Uber is e-commerce, right? So if you think in that direction, then you realize that this idea of an e-commerce site makes absolute no sense because it's about customer relationship and it's about easy interactions. It's not about an e-commerce site, right? So one thing that you will ask me is, well, okay, those are great, like, this is great, like, philosophy, but what do you do about it, right? So the one thing you can do about it is to really focus on mobile, right? Because, and when I say mobile, even though you will see like an old iPhone actually and an Android, when I talk about mobile, I actually don't talk about, I'm not talking about Android or iOS or any of the platforms or native versus like, mobile sites. I'm just talking about this idea of the personal computer. Like, mobile is a reflection of a personal computer. Mobile is not just a marketing channel or a sales channel. Mobile is you. Mobile is your identity, right? Mobile is payment. Mobile is the interaction between the digital world and the physical world. And as e-commerce evolves into this next stage where it's not about the desktop anymore, I actually think there's huge opportunities in a way that any brand, every brand can become an important part of their customers' lives and to better serving their customers. And a lot of that goes through mobile, right? So just before I came in my introduction, we talked about the Frank and Oak pop-up shops. And it's interesting because right now we're operating 7 locations in Canada and the US. We just opened our first pop-up shop in Boston last week. And a lot of people ask me, okay, well, what's the deal? Like, you often talk about the fact that e-commerce doesn't scale as well. Are you there to sort of like compensate for that via like the in-store sales? Is retail back? There is a trend right now that a lot of e-commerce players are going to retail. And I think that it is something that all of us that are in the e-commerce business need to consider, right? Like, how do the different channels play together, and how does this idea of being a brand across different channels comes into play? So my answer when it comes to our pop-up shops and creating that extra, basically, piece of content around the brand is the fact that if we're going to go more mobile, right, and if the world is moving towards local delivery and this aspect of having a more intimate experience, then physical spaces definitely have a role to play in the future of e-commerce. I think that the role that it has to play will be different for different brands. For some brands, it will have to do with distribution, right? Same-day distribution, local warehousing. In some brands, like in the case of Frank and Oak, what we talked about is a lot about the values that we stand for, right? It's a lot about the community behind the brand. Throughout my entire presentation, I didn't even talk about products, right? Although I do recommend you guys go check it out. For us, we actually decided that, well, stores about community. So most of our stores don't have a lot of products in them. They actually have coffee shops and bars. Why? Because we're about community, and we're leveraging that physical spaces to be relevant in your local neighborhood, right? So one of the pictures that you guys see here is one of our stores in Toronto, where basically, like, it's busy. It's a busy lifestyle space. We're not aiming to sell you products because every single customer that walks in that space already has our mobile apps. It's a way, basically, to build that connection even at a deeper level. All right, so to kind of like sum up what I'm talking about, I kind of threw at you guys like a lot of different ideas about how to create a brand in today's world, but those are sort of the philosophies that Frank and Oak stands for, right? We assume that media and commerce is one and one only, that the product and content are both our responsibility. The second aspect that we assume that technology, that every fashion and retail company will become in some ways a technology company because the forms of distribution that are going to happen in the next basically 20 years have to do with technology, but that ultimately values are still what really brings people together and what will differentiate companies in the long run. All right, so that's all I had. You guys can reach out to me, and I guess there's some questions.